What's happening, everyone? My name is Alex and welcome back. For this camera comparison we have the brand new Samsung Galaxy S23 and of course the iPhone 14 Pro. So we are starting this camera comparison by recording with the front-facing cameras. If you're recording with the front-facing cameras, both devices can record at 4K at 60 frames per second. However, at this time we are doing 4K at 30 frames per second. We have a super sunny day, but it is a bit windy, so you may hear some wind aside from my voice. So I'm currently walking. I'm also trying to hold the phones as steady as possible, and we're also gonna start running. And we'll turn around and we'll basically go back towards the scooter, but now we have the sun right behind me, so you can see how the cameras perform under these conditions. Alright, next let's switch over the cameras to the rear cameras and see how those work on the S23. Alright, and we are moving on to the rear cameras on the S23 and of course the iPhone 14 Pro. So the maximum recording resolution for the S23 is 8K at 30 frames per second, where the maximum recording resolution for the iPhone 14 Pro is 4K at 60 frames per second. However, at this time we are doing 4K at 30 frames per second with both devices. We are gonna pan left and we're gonna be walking this way. As you can see for yourself, we have a super sunny day, but it is a bit windy, so you may hear some wind in these recordings. I'm also trying to keep the phones as steady as possible, and we're gonna start running now. So you can see how that video stabilization works. We'll stop here and we'll pan to the right. So basically towards the sun. And we'll walk this way. So yeah, this is how recording done with the main camera on the back of the S23 and the iPhone 14 Pro would look like if you're recording in 4K at 30 frames per second. Alright, and I also wanted to show you how an 8K at 30 frames per second recording done with the S23 would look like. Now, of course, with the iPhone 14 Pro we cannot do that, so I am recording in 4K at 30 frames per second with the iPhone 14 Pro. But doing 8K at 30 frames per second with the Samsung Galaxy S23. So yeah, this is how recording in 8K at 30 frames per second would look like. I'm hoping that Final Cut Pro can actually process this footage. Okay, and we are moving on to our next recording. So for this recording, I've switched the cameras to the ultra-wide cameras on the back of the two devices, and once again I am recording in 4K at 30 frames per second. But as I said, with the S23 you could actually do 4K at 60 or 8K at 30 frames per second, where the maximum recording resolution for the iPhone 14 Pro is 4K at 60 frames per second with this lens as well. So we're gonna walk this way, just so you can see how that video stabilization works on both devices. And I can also run for a bit. And we're gonna turn around. So this was the ultra-wide camera recording in 4K at 30 frames per second with both devices. It's also a bit windy, so you may hear some wind in these recordings. And I also want to show you the super steady mode on the S23. The maximum recording resolution for this mode is 2K at 60 frames per second versus action mode on the iPhone 14 Pro. The maximum recording resolution on the iPhone is 2.8K. So let's go running. We'll turn around and we'll go this way. And we'll walk nice and slow. So yeah, that's how the video stabilization would work for this video mode. Alright, and we are moving on to our last video test. For this video test, we are recording with the main cameras on the back of the two devices and recording in 4K at 60 frames per second. I want to show you how 4K at 60 frames per second would look like. I'm also gonna walk. I'm trying to hold the phones as steady as possible. And let's go for a quick run. We'll stop here and we'll turn around. So this is how recording done with the main cameras and recording in 4K at 60 frames per second with the S23 and the iPhone 14 Pro would look like. Alright, we have a quick video test in low light between the Samsung Galaxy S23 and of course the iPhone 14 Pro. For this recording I'm using the main camera on the back of each device and recording in 4K at 30 frames per second. We are walking this way, we have a bit more light around here. Now, from what I'm seeing on the screens here, maybe the iPhone has the sharper video, but again, we'll have to see how this footage actually looks on the computer. So yeah, main cameras, low light, 4K at 30 frames per second. Alright, so some super quick thoughts about the video recordings. First of all, the internal microphone in the S23 seems to be better than the one that we have for the iPhone 14 Pro, but that was also the case last year with the S22. For the front-facing camera, even though the video quality on the S23 has improved compared to last year's S22, well, the colors aren't exactly perfect in there. If you look at my jacket in those recordings, well, my jacket is actually black, not purple. So there is room for improvement for that front-facing camera. But moving to the rear cameras, the video quality from the S23 is actually just as good as the video quality that we get from the iPhone 14 Pro. So I can't really see any difference there. The video stabilization is just as good. Not to mention that for that super steady video that we get from the S23, the footage is actually sharper at a lower resolution than the footage that we get from the iPhone 14 Pro. So overall, a big improvement for the video quality on the S23 compared to last year's S22. Alright, and we are moving on to some sample pictures, and we are starting with some pictures that I took with the ultra-wide cameras on the back of the two devices. Well, looking at those pictures, the same situation that we had last year with the S22 and of course the iPhone 14 Pro. So the colors are more accurate from the S23, the sharpness is also a bit better in those pictures taken by the S23, not to mention the dynamic range is better in most pictures taken by the S23. So for that ultra-wide camera, I feel that the S23 does better than the iPhone 14 Pro. Moving on to some 5x zoom pictures. Well, here looking at these pictures, I have to say that most pictures do look a bit sharper from the S23. I was actually expecting that the pictures would be fairly similar for 5x zoom, but no, it seems that the S23 does better once again. As for 10x zoom pictures, realistically neither device does that amazing, but if I would have to choose on, once again I feel that the S23 does a bit better than the iPhone 14 Pro. So for zoom pictures, once again the S23 does better. Next we are moving on to portrait mode pictures, and for portrait mode pictures, well, here everything is the opposite. So looking at those pictures, first of all, I can actually see more on Laura's face from the pictures taken by the iPhone 14 Pro. The colors from the iPhone 14 Pro are better in those pictures. They expose the subject better in many situations. So for portrait mode pictures, I don't know what happened to the S23, but the iPhone 14 Pro definitely did better in every single picture. Definitely leave a comment down below and let me know your thoughts. Which phone do you prefer for those portrait mode pictures? Alright, and we are moving on to pictures that I took with the main cameras during the day. Of course, all the pictures were taken on auto mode and maybe about a second apart from each other. So the pictures that I took with the S23 are actually very similar to the pictures that I took with the S22 last year. So once again, the colors from the S23 do seem to be a bit more accurate than the colors that we get in those pictures taken by the iPhone 14 Pro. The dynamic range is better in most of those pictures taken by the S23, not to mention the sharpness is also slightly better in most of those pictures taken by the Samsung Galaxy S23. So if I would have to choose one phone for pictures, but again this was the case last year with the S22. So I feel that the S23 does better for picture taking in general than the iPhone 14 Pro. And once again, leave a comment down below and let me know your thoughts. Which one do you prefer for the main camera and daytime pictures? Alright, and we are moving on and checking out some nighttime pictures. For all the nighttime pictures that you are seeing right now, I actually use the night mode available on both devices. So for the main camera and the ultra-wide camera, and we are starting with the pictures that I took with the main camera. Now, I was kind of expecting to see some improvements over the Samsung Galaxy S22, but I honestly don't see any improvements. In fact, these pictures may not be as sharp as the pictures that I used to take with the S22. I'm gonna do a separate camera comparison between the S22 and the S23. But looking at these pictures, it looks like the iPhone 14 Pro does have the edge for those nighttime pictures. So slightly sharper nighttime pictures taken by the main camera. And moving on to pictures that I took with the ultra-wide camera, well, realistically here neither device does that amazing, but if I would have to choose one, once again, I feel that I would choose the iPhone 14 Pro. Maybe the pictures are slightly sharper, but I guess not all of them. Some of them are a bit sharper. So neither device does that amazing for those ultra-wide pictures and the night mode. What do you guys think? Which pictures do you prefer for nighttime pictures? The ones from the Samsung Galaxy S23 or the ones from the iPhone 14 Pro? And lastly, selfies. And we are starting with some daytime selfies, and here it seems that the Samsung Galaxy S23 does a bit better than the iPhone 14 Pro. Those pictures have a bit better colors, I'm gonna say. So an improvement from last year's Samsung Galaxy S22, because that one didn't have the best selfie camera. Now, for nighttime selfies, neither device does that great, but if I would have to choose one, probably the S23 does better than the iPhone 14 Pro. So what do you guys think about the Samsung Galaxy S23? Is it worth upgrading from the S22 or not really? Definitely leave a comment and let me know.